Edit audio.
This podcast discusses murder and violence against children. Please take care while listening.
And I keep calling her name, and I step inside the entryway, and I walk straight to the living room, and I notice some things were in a disarray to the right of me. But I turned to the left because I knew exactly where the house phone was, and it's in the kitchen dining room area. And I called 911 to notify them that this is something more than, somebody not showing up to work.
In the first episode of the Feeney family murders, I told you about the Feeneys, what felt like a wholesome family of four living in the Ozarks. And if you ask anyone in Springfield, myself included, they'd almost certainly tell you that this is a safe place to grow up. In the first season of the podcast, there was a common narrative among those we interviewed that said, things like this just don't happen in Springfield, Missouri. People remember the three missing women, but did everyone forget about the Feeneys? Neighbors in the Feeney's Southland Village subdivision would say that they were a nice couple who could be found working in their home and playing with their children. They had an above-ground swimming pool that their son Tyler loved, and their favorite TV shows were Dave's World and Home Improvement. But this portrait of the perfect family would be dismantled on the morning of February 27, 1995. That Monday, Cheryl and her children Tyler and Jennifer were found dead inside their home, while John Feeney was away at a teachers' conference. In this episode, I want to lay out the crime scene in detail. It's disturbing, but it's a crucial step in understanding this case, and why investigators would come to believe the crime scene was staged. This is the Feeney Family Murders, an Ozarks true crime story, and I'm your host, Ann Roderick Jones. Listen in as we unpack this disturbing murder and ultimately try to find out who killed Cheryl, Tyler, and Jennifer. It was Monday, February 27th, 1995, and no one was answering the phone at the Feeney family house. John Feeney was out of town, and his wife Cheryl was at home with their two children, Tyler and baby Jennifer. When Cheryl Feeney didn't show up for her nursing shift at Cox Hospital that morning, her coworkers became concerned. Here's Teresa again, a friend and coworker of Cheryl's.
And I knew Cheryl outside of work, too. Her oldest son and my oldest daughter were the same age. And as our children grew, we did birthday parties with each other. And so the children would be invited to each other's house for birthdays. And we would sit and talk. She had a pool at her house. And so we would have time to bring my girls over there to do pool parties and just have fun hanging out, really.
Teresa has been extremely generous with her time and her story. She had refrained from talking with the press until now. And I met her through a mutual friend. She also knows my mother-in-law, who was her nursing school instructor. Teresa told us that she spoke to Cheryl on the evening of Saturday, February 25th. Jennifer, the baby, was sick, and the two nurses discussed what antibiotics might be best for her recovery. That was the last time she would talk to her friend.
Anyway, she'd asked me about the treatment, and I talked to her for a little bit and kind of told her what the doctors had prescribed for my two girls. And then we had gotten off the phone.
When Teresa arrived at the house, what she saw immediately unsettled her. Like she mentioned in episode 1, the newspaper was still on the front porch, and a glass panel on the front door was painted white on the inside.
And I'm thinking, what? That's weird. I've never noticed that before. So as the doors opened, I see their closet door opened up in the hallway. And I thought, well, somebody must have needed to grab some coats really quick for some reason, or jackets. On the fireplace is a humidifier that's running, but it's completely empty. There's a ceiling fan that's going.
And that makes sense to me. If Jennifer was sick, she likely had a humidifier plugged in. As Teresa is calling the police, she looks down the hall.
As I'm talking to them on the phone, I turn and I look through the door that goes out into the garage. So the garage door was shut, but this door was wide open. And Cheryl's car is sitting with the hood up and a TV and some other stuff that was on top of the car. And I thought, this is so odd. What is going on? And of course, my immediate reaction was, oh, was this a gang that came in here?
In the garage, items were found in the trunk of the car. A battery charger was attached to the car, giving the impression that the perp was planning to steal the car to transport the items. But the battery wasn't dead, so why would someone need a charger? Inside the house, the hall closet was wide open. The cabinet door in the living room was open. Shelves looked as if things were missing. Cheryl's purse was sitting on top of the kitchen table and looked as if someone had gone through it. 2 drawers in the china cabinet were pulled out. The cabinets under the kitchen sink were open and items were knocked over. There was a white beige liquid which appeared to be paint that was tracked on the living room and bedroom floors. Rita Sanders was a homicide major case investigator at the time, and her memory is impeccable.
I was at home and I got a call from the sheriff that I needed to report to the Missouri State Highway Patrol conference room that there had been a homicide. When I walked in, I heard, I'll never forget this, I heard, we've got a Springfield school teacher whose wife and children have been murdered. And I remember taking my seat and turning to the person that was next to me and said, wasn't John Feeney's family, was it? And they just looked at me with shock. I don't know why. I just had a feeling. And they said, yeah, as a matter of fact. And so that's how I initially found out about it. Was I got a call from the sheriff, and he called me out because I was the major case detective for our unit, for our department.
Rita is another one of those people involved who gave us a lot of her time. Rita and John's paths intersected long before the Feeney family murders. They both attended the same high school. John was a year behind her. Rita went on to work in policing, and John became a chemistry teacher. Their paths crossed again when John was teaching at Drury University. Rita was taking a chemistry night class while policing during the day. Rita pulled up to speak with us in a giant lime green truck. She's a petite woman, now a powerful attorney. She remembers walking into the crime scene.
The paint was spilled in the garage. There was a puddle of it. And whoever did this supposedly stepped in the paint and walked across the room and walked across the living room, okay?
It looked as if the house had been torn apart. John would later report that about 300 items were stolen from the residence, including jewelry and electronics.
Her jewelry box was sitting on the bathtub, and it had been gone through. A drawer was pulled out in the bedroom. The drawers were pulled out to make it look like robbery. However, when I went through one of the drawers, there was like $40 cash in it that wasn't taken.
The back door appeared to be kicked in, and there was a footprint left behind on the door. Investigators and prosecutors would later focus on this door and the footprints throughout the house as an indicator that the crime scene was staged to look like a robbery. There appeared to be some sort of graffiti on the wall, and the words die and bit were written with whitish paint, the same paint that was tracked throughout the house in size 11 shoe prints. Another detail about those words written on the wall. When investigating this, I would hear it reported as both the word bit and bitch. And there's a difference. Did someone mean to write the word bit, or were they intending to write the word bitch and got interrupted? Cheryl was found in her bedroom wearing a nightgown. The heat from the waterbed had been turned up to the highest level, which caused her body to decompose more rapidly. This would make it more difficult for police investigators to determine the time of death. A hair, recently dyed a reddish brown, was found on Cheryl's red nightgown, and 2 gray hairs were found in the garage, one on a paintbrush and another on a piece of cardboard, items used by the killer or killers to vandalize the house with beige paint. Here's Teresa again. She remembers going into Cheryl's room and finding her.
Her face is turned away from the doorway, and her hair is covering her face. Like so the killer didn't have to see her face. There was a knife or something. I cannot even remember. There was something at the foot of the bed, and I really, that's kind of a blur for me.
Here's Rita.
I do remember that she was cut on the side of her face with a knife. And I think probably he used that knife as well, or whoever it was used that knife to cut the cord on the blinds, which was what was used to strangle the little girl.
Jennifer and Tyler were each found in their respective rooms. Jennifer had been strangled with what investigators would later realize was the cord from the blinds. She was wearing a purple and blue top printed with ballerina bunnies and was lying face down in her crib. Tyler was laying in his bed with his knees propped up and a Mickey Mouse pillow over his face.
Jennifer was laying in her crib on her stomach, curled up in a ball. But I noticed this white cord coming down her back. And later in the trial, it was said that that was the cord from the mini blind in her room.
When investigating this case, I would read different reports on what was used to strangle the baby, which were a cord and a shoelace. And these little details often matter a lot. In this case, we were able to find the initial police report and found it to be a cord from the bedroom blinds.
And the manner in which she was strangled had to be horrible. I mean, she wasn't strangled around her neck. Her mouth was tied open.
Jennifer died from strangulation, but Tyler and Cheryl both died from wounds inflicted by a blunt instrument. Police recovered a knife from the crime scene, but whatever it was that caused the blunt force trauma was never found. So from the initial reports, it looks as if the home had been burglarized, that someone had broken in from the basement, ransacked parts of the house, pulled out drawers, and then murdered the family and painted what is said to look like graffiti on the wall. Because of that, some people immediately suspected that it could have been a gang-related crime. Springfield was a relatively safe town at the time, but in the 90s, low-level crime was moving in from larger cities. Ron Davis was a journalist in Springfield in the 90s.
I know that the police had always talked about like gang-related activities. It's always one of the favorite parts of Springfield where 17, 18, 19-year-olds were talking about like being members of the Crips or Bloods, and it's like, yeah, I don't think so at all. But it was more like gang offshoots out of Chicago, and most of that was just crack cocaine dealing. Prosecutors tried to make a bunch out of like Dungeons and Dragons stuff, and that maybe it could have been satanic but none of that made any sense either. I think they were just trying to find the most outlandish things possible because the crime scene was so outlandish. I mean, it looked like somebody had really just gone insane without any meaning. Like, why splash paint on the walls? Why do that? Why move stuff out of the house into a trunk where you know you're not going to steal it?
Robert Keyes was a reporter at the News Leader at the time and was skeptical about this being gang-related.
I'm not an expert on gangs, right? But I'm just thinking, die bit. Okay, what does that mean? Maybe he was going to write die bitch. Who knows? But do gangs do that? And do gangs come in and beat to death a woman and beat to death a little boy and then tie? I mean, it just sound like that doesn't sound like the kind of murders that gangs commit. It just didn't feel like it was a gang type of a killing, unless you knew that John had or Cheryl had pissed off a gang, but just sort of a random, I bet it was a gang, just didn't seem to sit well. You know, it's like, why? Because we can't think of anything else?
Rita told us that the whole gang-related theory was quickly ruled out by investigators.
The walls were taken out, where the wall that said die bit, and then it had what was supposed to be like some gang graffiti. It was not gang graffiti. I was the gang narcotics expert analyst for the Springfield Police Department. I wrote the gang awareness manual. It was not gang graffiti. It was made-up gang graffiti.
As for a break-in, Rita said that didn't look right either.
The paint consistency remained the same on the shoe prints. So if you're going to walk through the kitchen, as you walk, that paint's going to come off of your feet. And once you hit the carpet, you might have a little bit starting, but by the time you get clear across the living room, there's not going to be any paint. The footsteps were consistent. Every one of them was full of paint. It's like he would take a step, paint, take a step, paint, to show that whoever had been in the garage had stepped in the paint, okay? That just doesn't happen. You don't have the same consistency when you're walking across carpet when you step in something. And so it was just obviously staged. The door had a footprint on it, like it was kicked in. The basement door looked like it was kicked in, but there was no meat on the screws. You know, when you kick a door in, it rips the screws out, right? Which leaves pulp on the screws. None of the screws had any pulp on them, which means that they were unscrewed. The door was never kicked in.
Rita also told me that there weren't any footprints on the outside of the house, and she reiterated that the paint was the same consistency from the garage through the living room to the bedroom, but that there were no prints coming back. So could someone have parked inside the garage, committed the crime, and then drove away? According to Rita, there was enough room for 2 cars in the garage. And this part is so strange and haunting to me. The family photos had been turned to face the wall.
All of the pictures of every family member that had been on the wall had been taken off and turned facing the wall. Now, one that sticked as well, he probably took, whoever it was, took it off to see if there was a safe behind it. Well, you would just take it down, or you would just knock it off. You wouldn't take it down and turn it facing the wall. That's because you don't want to see the pictures of your family.
So who would want to do this? And why would they go to such lengths to elaborately stage the crime scene after? Were they not afraid of getting caught? It's at this point that investigators begin to narrow in on one suspect, John Feeney. Up until this point, many residents of the area had their sympathies with John. He was the friendly high school teacher and the loving father who was out of town while his family was murdered. So what made the police turn their investigation towards him? Jackie Schreibner worked with John at Glendale High School.
The majority felt that he was innocent because we hadn't seen anything we heard how violent the murders were. The big majority of us couldn't imagine John being like that, to do that to his own little children and his wife.
We both realized that this was going to be a case where they were probably going to arrest the dad almost immediately, because that's what police do. They focus on the most likely suspect, and that would have been John Feeney.
On the next episode of the Feeney Family Murders, we look into the life of John Feeney and how he was seen by those who were closest to him.
I have never experienced this feeling before, but when she married John, I wanted to get out of that building, the church. I was angry inside because I guess I felt he just wasn't the right guy. And I've never had a feeling that strong, but it was just like she married the wrong guy.
Well, the faculty was really split about, was John having affairs with students, or was he just someone who liked to do things with students? I don't know.
Feeney Family Murders is part of the Edit Audio original series Ozarks True Crime. It is written and hosted by me, Ann Roderick Jones. This episode was produced by Ali Sirwa and Kathleen Speckert and was edited, mixed, and mastered by Ali Sirwa. Our executive producer is Steph Colburn. Thank you immensely to the entire Edit Audio team and Patrick Rindle for the theme music. To those who generously shared their time and information with me, thank you. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at hello@editaud.io. That's HELLO@EDITAUD.io.